It's good to be back home. I've been here so often and I feel like I'm almost a part of this congregation, and it's just good to be here again. I believe, Will, you said this is the 5th time I've been here in this thing, and I just enjoy it every time. It's just so great to be around folks up here, and I live down in West Palm Beach, Florida, and that's a weird place to live. You got Donald Trump down there, and you got all this other stuff going on down there, and, you never know what's going to happen. And you get back up to where ordinary people live. Is that all right? And I mean that in the most complimentary way. You folks are just as country as I am, and I feel like I belong here. Sometimes I feel like I'm in a foreign country down there in South Florida, but it's just good to be back up here, and it's a place I can just relax and be myself. I want to thank these elders for making it possible for me to be able to be here. I want to thank this entire church. I want to thank you for the way that you've listened to my sermons. I don't know of a gospel meeting I have ever preached in that people listened any better than you did, than you have. And if you're faking that look on your face while you're listening, keep it up. It makes me feel so good to think they're really listening to me. They're trying to figure out, what truth is. And that's all that matters. I want to encourage you to work carefully for the Lord. The church is struggling in so many places. You know of congregations that are just struggling. They're barely able to make it. And I'm thankful that you are vibrant in what you're trying to do and that you still have gospel meetings. I think it is remarkable how COVID has impacted the church. There's hardly a congregation I know of. In fact, I only know of one congregation that has increased its attendance, regular attendance, since COVID. Every other church is smaller. And so I recognize that, because the work that I'm doing now is going out and trying to help small congregations to be revived, and spending every, as much time as I possibly can, the rest of the time I live on this earth, just to be out to try to help some of these congregations. Got 50 members or less. You know what's happened in the church? We have accepted the fact that those people are not likely going to come back. And that's the truth. Did not Jesus talk about pruning the vine? And that may be a part of what has happened. That some of those who are not as diligent, they're not here. I'm not talking about those who are elderly and those who've gotten older in the last period of time, but just some of those individuals that sometimes you just wish they'd get more involved and more involved. But you know what's left? Here's the danger. Churches have stopped having vacation Bible schools. They've stopped having gospel meetings. I'm not talking particularly about St. Clair. I want you to understand that, because I know you folks haven't done that in relationship to gospel meetings, and I thank you for it. But churches across this nation are content because they haven't had a gospel meeting or a vacation Bible school or any outreach in the last 3 years. They are content to not do it. One of the weekends that we spend with the congregation is called Revive Us Again. How do you recreate? How do you rekindle that fire that has burned down? It's not burned out. We're still meeting. But have we lost something? And have we accepted not just the absence of individuals, but we've accepted the non-involvement in the church? I'm telling you, when you're worshiping God, on the internet, that type of thing, it's hard to get used to getting up on a Sunday morning and getting dressed and coming to Bible class and to worship. And if you're not as diligent as you were 5 years ago, let me urge you, you better look at yourself. Is there an air of complacency that has come into your heart? That's enough. I don't mean that in any negative sense. But I just want you to understand the reality of things that are happening. With all the love that's in my body, I thank you for the fact that you are still trying to be a representation of Christ in this area. And finally, I want to say a word about Will and Betty. You guys don't know how fortunate you are. I believe Will to be one of the best servants of God, the best preachers I know on this earth. And you folks are so lucky to have him here. Far too many times, our Christian colleges, it maybe sometimes even our schools of preaching, they polish pebbles and dim diamonds. And Will, I know sometimes you verbalize me, well, I didn't go anywhere to learn how to preach. You went to the best school I know on earth, and that is the University of Hard Knocks. You learn how to preach by first learning how not to preach, and thank God that people were long-suffering with me when I was trying to learn how to preach, and they still wanted to hear me preach. I don't know that I've learned how to preach yet, but I'm not going to let up. You guys are blessed, and I mean that not to praise some man above any other individuals, but Will and Betty, you guys have always been an encouragement to me. When Jesus left the earth, God had been in a human body. I can't comprehend that. I don't believe you can either. How big is the universe? Is God larger than the universe that He created? How on earth do you get God, Emmanuel? How do you get God in a human body? They shall call His name Emmanuel, which is by interpretation, God with us. Isaiah chapter 7, verse 14. You've got to understand that. Who is this man, Jesus? The creator of the world came into this earth in the body of a baby. He could not talk. He could not feed himself. He could not walk. And yet God so loved the world, and Christ so loved the world that God gave, and Christ came and gave His life for us. I think about how handicapped He had to feel. He's lying in that manger and He wants to turn over, and God is not even able in infancy to turn over. That's hard to comprehend. Here's the question, here's the lesson. What evidence did He leave on this earth that God had been here? We talked in the Bible class hour about the pyramids and how they're evidence of some great, great architects and individuals that were amazingly marvelous. We still haven't figured out exactly how they put all of that together, have we? Sometimes people say, well, an alien came and created the pyramids. That's the only way you can find something that massive and that huge. There is a man, an alien, who has lived on this earth, and His name is Jesus. He didn't leave behind the pyramid. Isn't that remarkable? What did Jesus leave on this earth so that we'd know He'd been here? In the Bible class hour, we talked about this is what He left. the Bible. They had the Old Testament, but the Old Testament without the New Testament is as incomplete as anything could be, because no man understood what God had in mind. But he left something else. What is it? Open your Bibles, and we'll spend several minutes here, next several minutes, to Ephesians chapter 3. Look at Ephesians chapter 3. Verse 1. For this reason, I, Paul, the prisoner of Jesus Christ for you Gentiles, if indeed you have heard of the grace, the dispensing of grace that was given to me, and given to me in order that I might give it to you. Here it is. How that by revelation he made known unto me the mystery. As I wrote afore in few words, whereby when you read, you may understand the mystery of Christ. We talked in that Bible class hour about looking at every word, and if you don't look at every word here, you're going to be robbed of some great, great treasures. Paul says, there is the mystery of the gospel. He made known to me the mystery, as I've written before in a few words, that you may understand the mystery of Christ. And then he says, in other ages, it was not made known unto the sons of men, as it has now been revealed unto us. What's a mystery? You like television programs, you like murder mysteries. Surely you're not that individual who buys a book, a novel or something, and you get involved, and you read the first 3 or 4 chapters, and then you jump over to the last chapter and see how it turns out. Did you do that in class when you were in school? I want you to read this Bible, read this story. We'll talk about it in literature class. And you read the first 2 or 3 paragraphs, first 2 or 3 chapters, and then you hurry over and you read the end. So when you sit in class, you can say, well, one thing I didn't understand was right at the very first. But I finally figured it out when I got over here, and you tried to lie to the teacher, make them think that you understood the mystery. You don't have any idea what up between page 3 and page 50. You understand? The mystery of God. The mystery of God that was not made known in other ages. Can you keep your finger here, put a marker here in Ephesians chapter 3, and turn to the last chapter of the book of Romans? Because this thing is discussed in the last chapter of the book of Romans, discussed in another way. But look at the last 3 or 4 verses of Romans chapter 16. Paul says to the church at Rome, now to him who is able to establish you according to my gospel. Paul, where'd you get that gospel? Ephesians, by revelation it was made known to me. According to my gospel and the preaching of Jesus Christ, according to the revelation of the mystery kept secret since the world began. You understand, those of you who were here from the Bible class hour, you could have asked Isaiah about a lamb that is led to the slaughter, and the sheep before his shears is done, he opened not his mouth. And you could have asked Isaiah, what does that mean? And you know what Isaiah would have said? I don't have a clue. When I talk to you about the Lamb of God, when I talk to you about the Lamb that was silent before his shearers, you know about the trial of Jesus, but it had never happened. And it had not entered into the heart of man. It was a mystery kept secret since the world began. But then he says, the revelation of the mystery kept secret since the world began. But now, you see the word now? I've circled the word now in my Bible. But now has been made manifest. That which no Old Testament prophet could ever begin to understand. The Bible said it had not entered into the heart of a single Old Testament prophet what God had in mind. And we looked this morning in that previous hour, 2 Peter chapter 1, that even the angels did not understand it. That's astounding. You become one of those angels and you see the Garden of Eden and you see, now I know what God's got in mind. He's going to put man on this earth. How long are Adam and Eve in the garden before they're cast out of the garden? And the angels looking down from heaven saying, what just happened? We don't know what God had in mind. You and I know the creation story. We know about the introduction of sin. We know about where sin comes from. We know about the lust of the flesh and the lust of the eyes and the pride of life. That's a New Testament thing, but it's over there in the Garden of Eden. They didn't understand it. And be that angel, and look when the flood comes. God has your plan working out. There's not a single person, every thought and imagination of man's heart is on evil continually. And you're an angel looking down and you think, what on earth is happening? And then it destroys everybody. Except Noah. Well, maybe Noah gets Noah gets out of the ark. Early, what does it do? It gets drunk. Which things the angels desire to look into? Oh, I got it. Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. I'll make of you a great nation. Oh, okay. Wait a minute. Abraham doesn't have any kids. You're that angel trying to figure out how God's going to make of Abraham a great nation and put a great nation in a great land and send a great Savior. And the angels are looking up there. How can this be? He didn't even have any children. You see Abraham and Sarah trying to help God work out his plan. So Abraham has a child by another woman that's not his wife. They're trying to help God out. Have we ever done that? Yeah, we try to figure out how God's going to help us through our problems, and we're upset when He doesn't do it our way. Look what Hagar created and what Abraham and Hagar created when Ishmael was born. And you know who are the descendants of Ishmael? The Arabs. What if there'd never been an Ishmael? How would that have changed the world in our day? And so he has, and then you know what he does? When he has Isaac, God says, go kill Isaac. God, what have you got in mind? And when Abraham's climbing that mountain, Abraham doesn't have a clue how God's going to work it out. He believes in God, he trusts God, and knows God's going to work it out. And when Isaac says, where's the sacrifice? Abraham doesn't have a clue. Figuratively speaking, when Abraham is walking up one side of the mountain, guess what God has walking up the other side of the mountain? Around. Why? Because you need that as a part of God's plan. Which things angels desire. And you read it all the way through, and you cannot figure it out. But he said, it's now been revealed. You know of that great nation. through Isaac, and then through Jacob, and from Jacob and Esau and Ishmael, Abraham's descendants. Many nations came out of Abraham, and Abraham was the father of a multitude. You've got to understand that. And then we understand about the great land. Yeah, we've read the book of Exodus. How's it working out when Joseph gets down to the land of Egypt? Well, that's not working out much good at all. He's 13 years a slave down there in the land of Egypt. And how on earth is God going to be able to get the Jews down in the land of Egypt and get them back out? And God just keeps working it out, working it out. And you know that Bible story, don't you? But he says, this mystery that angels desired to look into is now made manifest by the prophetic scriptures, made known to all nations according to the commandment of the everlasting God, and it's made known, look at this verse, to cause people to obey God because they have faith. That's what it says, isn't it? Why do you have faith? Faith allows you to obey. Yes, why? But now I understand the mystery, and I'm going to obey God because I do understand the mystery. God has now revealed to me these things. Thank you very much. I need that. I don't know what happened to my throat all of a sudden. Thank you, Will. You stop and think about it. We understand it. But do we really understand it? And that's what this lesson is all about. Let's develop it. When Jesus leaves the earth, what's he left? Oh, 11 or 12 men. And that's it. At the end, Jesus, how many of these individuals are there faithful to you? You've been put on the cross. How many of them believe in the resurrection? You want to be that angel looking down? How's it going to work out? I go fishing. Even when he's walking with two of the disciples on the road to Emmaus, in the past tense they said, we had hoped that Jesus was the Messiah. You see the had hoped? It's a past tense. We've given up hope. He's been put to death. We don't know about his resurrection yet. And it's over. Let's go fishing. Let's go back to the life we had before. And no wonder he upbraided them because of their unbelief, and they would not believe those women who said, we've seen him. I think it is highly significant, the role that those women played. They came and stole his body. How could those women who were physically unable to roll back the stone steal his body? If the apostles were still believers, they might have come in and stolen the body, but not these women. You know what I think, thankful to God? You read the closing verses of Luke 23 and the early verses of Luke 24, and those women are the key to the resurrection of Jesus. They stood from afar and they saw him crucified, and they were a part of the taking of Jesus because they knew exactly where he had been placed. And on Sunday morning, they carried spices to continue with the burial process. It's not the apostles. It's not Peter, James, and John. It's Mary the mother of Jesus, Mary Magdalene. It's these women. They are the key to us knowing he was raised from the dead. They came to the tomb in which they had seen him been placed. Are you aware the apostles may not have known specifically where he was buried? They'd run out of the garden. You know, there's Peter there when the trial's going on, but Matthew 26:54 or 56 says that they all forsook him in the garden and fled. I know that they later learned where the tomb was, but those women knew specifically where he was, and they went to that specific tomb, and the angel said, he's not here, come and see. Look at the tomb, he's not here. What did he leave? 11 men. And that's it. Tarry in the city of Jerusalem, and you will be endued with power from on high. Because I am going to ask the Father, and he's going to send the Holy Spirit down on you. And that's what happened on Pentecost. At the end, listen, are you listening? At the end of the sermon, the end of the day on Pentecost, is there any visible evidence that Jesus has been raised? What about eyewitnesses? What about those men who stood up and said, and, you know, we have seen him. He's in heaven and he's poured out this which you now are seeing and hearing. For the whole city was in uproar because these ignorant and unlearned Galileans were speaking in languages they'd never understood. How? By the power of God. Sitting on them were tongues of fire. They visibly saw it. There was a visible manifestation of God's presence on the day of Pentecost. The massive impact of the sermon, so that 3,000 people that one day became a part of the body of Jesus. At the end of that day, it's not 11 disciples. It's not just 120 that were in the upper room. It's hundreds and tens of hundreds. It's thousands and thousands at the end of one day. What happened to Jesus? What did he leave behind on this earth? I want to tell you. And the Lord added unto them that day about 3,000 souls. And they were praising God and having favor with all the people. And the Lord kept on adding unto them every day those that were being saved. The day after Pentecost, the number's not 3,000. It's far more than that. The Lord is adding unto them every day. And then all of a sudden, it's not adding, it is multiplying. You know the difference in addition and multiplying? You add 5 people. That's a pretty good number to add. You multiply by 5. Multitudes. Now, thousands of thousands. I'm not sure how long it is from the time that the church starts until there's that persecution that scatters abroad, but over and over and over again, read the book of Acts and see the words added, and a great number of company of priests were obedient to the faith. Even the Jewish leaders, those men who've been serving down there at the temple under the law of Moses, they've given up being Old Testament priests and have become New Testament Christians. Could there have been 20,000 people when the church was scattered abroad because of persecution? If multiplying and then you multiply those who are multiplied, it's not 3,000 and 15,000, it's 15,000 And if you multiply 15 by 5, you've got 75,000. You figure that I don't know I know the 3,000. I know the Bible says that there were 5,000 men later, not counting the women. You take that number and start that multiplying it. You know what he left in Jerusalem? The very thing he said he would leave on this earth. I will build my church. And so persecution comes. And they that were scattered abroad, the apostles stayed in Jerusalem. Church leadership, preachers and elders and deacons, if they are church leaders, whatever that is, they're in Jerusalem. Ordinary members of the church went home. What they do? They went everywhere preaching the word. Where's home? Acts 2. And there were dwelling at Jerusalem devout men from every nation under heaven. You take the numbers. You do your own math. I don't know if there's 75,000. I just know multiply, and then you multiply the multipliers, and all of a sudden that number gets astronomically large. And when they went home, guess what they told people about? We went to Jerusalem and we stayed there for about 2 months. We got there for Passover and we stayed to Pentecost. And we felt an earthquake. And we saw the temple with a torn curtain. We felt the earthquake. We saw dead bodies coming out of the graves, because those graves were open and after the resurrection, and the whole city was on fire because there were those people who believed adamantly that Jesus had been raised from the dead. And they were determined that the whole world, where'd they go? They went back to the pagan world. Where'd they go? There were dwelling at Jerusalem devout men from every nation under heaven. And then he begins to list 13 or 14 different nations. You read those nations, you look at a map, and all of Asia Minor is covered. Arabia is covered. They went back to Arabia. They went to Cappadocia. They went to strangers in Rome. Went back to Rome. And if they become Christians, they went everywhere preaching the word. Philip goes down to Samaria. What happens when he gets to Samaria? First of all, why did he go to Samaria? Because the Bible said, you'll receive power and you'll be witnesses of me in Jerusalem, Judea, and Samaria. I don't know if you've ever thought about why on earth they would even have anything to do with the Samaritans. And yet the first recorded place outside of Jerusalem that the church went was up to the Samaritans. You know how the Jews felt toward the Samaritans? We have no association with it. They have no dealings, the New Testament says, with the Samaritans. And when Jesus talked to the Samaritan woman at the well, do you remember that? She wasn't the nicest kind of person, having had 5 husbands and shacked up with number 6. Do you think she'll obey the gospel? When Philip comes to Samaria, she goes back into the city. And let me tell you, here's an evil woman, a lower class woman by the moral standards by which we live. She goes back into that village, and you know what she says? Come and see, come and see, come and see. I have found the Messiah. She'd had a 10-minute conversation with him. And she walks back in and said, I don't know much, but if you'll just come and see. And the whole village comes out to hear the Messiah. Can you imagine the joy when just a very, very short time later, here are those Christians, first Philip and then Peter and John, come down to Samaria, and the gospel is flourishing in Samaria. Because the Church of Jesus Christ is intended to embrace those who are of low morality and those who are socially outcast and those who are racially mistreated. But not just there. To Antioch. And within 30 years or so of that Pentecost, here's what had happened. Colossians chapter 1, verse 23. Every creature under heaven had heard the gospel. Let me ask you, within 35 years, what evidence was there on this earth? Go preach the gospel to every creature. How on earth would Nero Caesar hear the gospel? You know the answer. When he said to the apostles, you go preach the gospel to every creature, he who believes and is baptized shall be saved. We've got to go tell Nero about this. Paul stood before King Agrippa and before Governor Festus and Governor Felix and before Nero Caesar himself. And then Paul could write, and every creature has heard about it. Kings and rulers, and the world knows about it. You know what he left? It's church. Here's a question. What denomination did he leave? We talked about Paul going, and preaching to Nero. Not only did he go preach to Nero, he went all over. Started churches everywhere. And in 1 Corinthians 4:17, he says, I preach the same thing. Gentile, Jewish, I preach the same gospel. It doesn't change. If the Apostle Paul came to Easy Liverpool to establish a church, of the 20,000 different denominations in America, what denomination would he establish? Folks, your religious friends have never had that question asked of them. And if you felt the force of what I've said, because you may have never heard it said that way, imagine the impact it would have on them when they are forced to say, not any of them. He built this church for the seed of the kingdom of heaven is this. I've been a missionary overseas. We went to Hamilton, New Zealand. And nobody had ever heard about this church that was in the Bible. And we taught New Zealanders about this church that's in this book. We didn't go there to make them a part of a denomination. We took them there to make them a part of the church. Isn't that remarkable? If a first century Christian walked into this building and he saw us have the Lord's Supper, you know what he'd say? They're still doing it. When you heard us sing, you know what he'd say? They're still doing it. When you heard us pray, he'd say, they're still doing it. Same kind of prayer. And when he saw us give, he'd say, they're still doing it. And I'd like to think that if that first century Christian walked in, he'd look up here and he'd say, you see that little short fat guy up there that's preaching? He's preaching exactly the same message that was preached in the first century. Because that church comes from planning this book. Can I make one closing application? It's not an immediate application. But I want you to go with me to the upper room. I want you to see that time when the disciples are fussing among each other. This is when the Lord washes their feet. And he says in Luke chapter 22, starting in verse 24, there was dispute among them as to which of them would be considered the greatest in the kingdom. And he said unto them, the kings of this earth exercise lordship over the Gentiles. Politicians exercise authority and pass the laws that govern you. That's what it said. There are those in Washington and in Columbus who make laws and they're just pushed on us, whether we like them or not. But he says they exercise authority over you. They try to make you a slave of them, of themselves. But it shall not be so among you. Whoever would be greatest among you, let him become the servant of all. Wow. And then he says, you have this command, and then in verse 29 he says to the apostles, and I bestow upon you the kingdom. He's come to establish the kingdom. He says, the Father's given me the kingdom, and I've given you the kingdom. I'm going to heaven. And the kingdom of earth is going to be left on this earth. And he says to those apostles in that upper room, as the Father has given me the kingdom, I give you the kingdom, and he has bestowed upon me. Brother and sister in Christ, at East Liverpool, God has put his kingdom in this city, and he has bestowed upon us the same responsibility that he bestowed on the apostles. What on earth are we doing with the kingdom? Well, I don't know how to teach anybody Could I tell you 3 words that every member of this church can say for evangelism? And I challenge you to do it. That woman in Samaria went back to the city and she says, "Come and see." And the whole city was converted. Not because she was a profound Bible scholar. Dan, you just don't know how prejudiced people are in this world. In this part of the country, they're so prejudiced against living right. I understand. It's always been that way, has it not? Philip finds Nathanael. And you know what he says? "Nathanael, I have found the Messiah." And Nathanael had to be so happy. We've been waiting for the Messiah, and now the Messiah's here. But when he says Jesus of Nazareth, prejudice kicked in. Sometimes when you look at others, you think, well, they are so wrapped up they'd never come to. Do you know what Philip does? He could have picked up his Bible and said, "I want to show you that something good can come out of Nazareth." You know what he said? "Come and see." I made a mistake, Will. I used to say, "Have you ever taught the gospel to anyone?" I used to say, "You cannot go to heaven by yourself." I know many characters in the Bible that went to heaven by themselves, like Noah and his family. The Lord did not send me to baptize. The kingdom of heaven is a man sowing seed. And when you say, "I cannot find anybody to teach," that's not what you're saying. When you say, "I can't find anybody to teach," do you know anybody at the grocery store? Do you know anybody where you buy your gas? Do you know anybody in the workplace? Do you know your neighbors? Who made you the judge of the soil? And because they may not obey the gospel, does not alleviate in any way your responsibility to say to every one of them, "Come and see." And not all are apostles, and not all are prophets, and not all are teachers. And that's 1 Corinthians chapter 12. But there are individuals in this church, if you will say, "Come and see," if this really is a church of Christ, if it really is the New Testament church, then unashamedly we need to say, not "Let me baptize you," and because you're not going to be baptized, and I know your heart, and I know you'll never be baptized, I don't have any responsibility. That man who is as prejudiced as he can be, that individual who is wayside soil, has as much right to hear the gospel as the most fruitful person on this earth. Don't ever say, "I cannot find anybody to teach." Every person you know is one to whom you can say, "Come and see." And if they come and they see and they walk away, you have relieved yourself. But if you sit silent, if members of this congregation silently sit by, I'll tell you where this church is headed. Think of vibrant churches that stopped reaching out. And how many doors of churches of Christ do you know that are closed or should be closed? It's this simple. Just come and see. I have found a church that is not just like this church in the Bible. I have found the church that is in this Bible. Come with me and see. And don't ever say, I cannot find anybody to teach. I told the folks at Plum Beach Place when I was preaching there in Florida, what do you mean you can't find anybody to teach? Don't you know any wayside soul? We're saying, I can't find anybody to baptize. Paul said, he did not send me to baptize. I'm going to give Agrippa, Felix, and Festus, and Nero a chance to see Jesus. But if Paul had said he won't obey the gospel, there's no need to talk to him. Nero would have gone to the judgment and could have said, you never mentioned him to me. I need to stop. I've looked at the clock. Thank you for listening. Folks, there's reality to what we're trying to do here. And it ought to touch our hearts and our souls to the very nth degree. And I beg of you to pray to God and to pray to God. God, give me enough courage not to go and try to teach crazy Nero. Give me enough conviction that Jesus is the Son of God and that the Lord has bestowed upon the people in this very building here the responsibility of the kingdom. And if they choose to go to hell and not a person is baptized in this next year, wonderful. You did the best you could with the soil that was there. But because the soil is not good does not mean that stony ground and wayside soil and soil that has weeds does not need the gospel. Everybody is in one of those categories. And because you can't find the person to baptize, what about those other three? Who's the wayside soil in the first century? Who is, you'll never have a chance of baptizing him? Saul of Tarsus. When God says, go preach to Saul, Ananias said, do you know how dangerous that would be? Ananias, you don't know the heart of Saul. And you don't know. And God does not give you the ability to outwardly stand and say, I know he won't obey. Let's help the church to grow. Let's give it our all. And if the congregations die, it's not shameful to those that finally have to close the door. But it's a matter of shame to close the doors and just let it happen not need to oversee the funeral of the congregation at East Liverpool. Brethren, I beg of you, the cross is too important. And what we have is so rich, we cannot lay it aside. Let's call upon God to help us. You want to be in that church? This one? Believe that Jesus is the Son of God and make up your mind today to follow him. And when you let us know you believe in Jesus, that's all we need to know. We'll baptize you. And the Lord will add you not to a denomination. He'll add you to this. God help us to reach the lost. And God help us to do everything we can. If you need to respond to this invitation as one who wants to become a Christian or as a wayward Christian, won't you do so right now as together we stand and sing. Will you come?